This is CyberSound, your simplified and fundamentals-focused source for all things cybersecurity.
Welcome to CyberSound. I'm your host, Jason Pufahl, joined today, Steve Maresca, John Madura.
Hi there.
And we're going to spend a bunch of time, I think, we kind of framed this a little bit as an AI governance discussion. Maybe it's an AI tolerance discussion, as we look to, sort of bring in sort of your background and how you're seeing that in the public schools. But John, maybe spend a second, just if you could, just on your background, just to refresh people's memory.
Absolutely. I'm a technology education teacher at the Morgan School in Clinton, Connecticut. I teach a variety of courses, which is great. Kids get exposed to a lot of different things. We have a wonderful intro to data science class. We have a traditional AP computer science class, and we've now brought on cybersecurity. We're bringing on networking next year. So exciting times. We're trying to stay embracing, the transitions in technology and keeping kids prepared for the future. So exciting time to be a technology education teacher.
And that's the segue.
That's great to hear.
Yeah.
I have fond memories of foundational stuff back then. Those last if you can create those introductions.
Yes, absolutely hoping to do that. I mean, kids are responding to it. The courses have never been more popular. All of our courses are maxed out in that way, which is wonderful. Students are talking about going into cybersecurity as a field, which is wonderful, into technology as a field, computer science, and they're asking me really good questions about it, and AI is a big one. So,
I should look at my phone and see what time it is, because we just spent a bunch of time discussing what we were going to talk about, which was it was all over the place. But where I want to start, I think, then is that level of interest that you just outlined. So kids are interested in the courses, and you indicated they're also, kids and parents are concerned that maybe AI has a negative impact on the possibility of getting them jobs in the IT space that they're kind of interested in. So I'd love for you to spend a minute on your thoughts.
Absolutely. And that's sort of the natural cycle of, I think, real interest in the field, is that they start asking hard questions. And the hard questions are, a student comes to me and says, hey, I've taken a couple of your courses. I'm interested in cybersecurity or programming or data science, but is AI going to replace my job? My parents want to know. They don't want to fork out all this money for an education that, I'm not going to actually get a job for. And the job market's tough. And so that's a question we're asking. Students are asking us. And what we tell students is, the tradition has been, as more technology increases, the need for more people has increased. I mean, that has been true. AI is a different thing, I think, at this point. I mean, we're all trying to get our heads around it. The capabilities have exceeded many of the things we've seen with other technology revolutions, I think, a little bit. But we don't have all the answers either, and we're thinking through some of these questions as well.
Earlier, we were speaking about technology as a leveling agent.
Yes.
An access granting kind of capability. I've heard carpenters say that, power tools made it easier for lots of folks to replace a team, but that means that people that didn't have the team or the skill set or the apprenticeship could become effective members executing that type of thing. It doesn't map exactly to this, but I do think that there's an element of that.
I completely agree. And one of the things we try to do is not just teach the tools in isolation, but we do try to make them applicable to a scenario. And we have a big advanced manufacturing drive in our technology education department as well. And we try to map many of the scenarios they see in cybersecurity or programming to what they might experience in like a manufacturing firm, trying to create that reality. And what it shows is that really it becomes less about the tools and a little bit more about how you're, getting products designed or built or manufactured, or how do you make sure your network is safe, and things like that, or even how do you put a network together to integrate these machines. And these are a lot of human decisions too, like how does it work for the people that are doing the work. And so we try to separate the tools from the decisions that are made and the relationships that you have as a person working in technology.
So in something like additive manufacturing, 3D printing and so forth,
Yes.
that makes the distance between an idea and the cycling around it and iterations thereof a lot shorter, right?
Yes, that's the idea.
So how does that apply for cybersecurity or data data science? For
Yeah, so what we've tried to do is we're in the middle of a project where we're integrating many of our CNC machines, which is exciting. So there's an opportunity for us to, not only just get that network established, but manage that network. And cybersecurity is a big part of that. And so we imagine students like acting as a system administrator, checking logs, things like that, and kind of like working as a professional and seeing how you have to explain to me how that works, right? Or somebody else. And so it becomes less about a tool that could be replaced by AI and more, what was your decision behind using that tool?
Sure.
And sort of how do they move things forward in an applied way?
So you had talked about you had introduced the idea of a survey course,
Yes.
and it sounds like there wasn't really appetite for it today.
Yeah, we definitely see a need. We're certainly a school district, like many, that are taking a conservative approach to introducing AI formally as a tool for students to say write papers or do research or do the technical work that we do. So students don't really have the unfettered access that we do outside of school. And so one of the thoughts
Unfettered meaning they don't, you block it on the firewall
Yes.
probably, or you prevent it from being accessed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Students can still, use the phones when they have a chance to, and they always use a phone. Any reason to use a phone is a good one.
Yeah, for sure.
So they try that, but formally we don't build that into the curriculum. So one of the thoughts we're thinking about now is a formal AI survey course, teaching prompt engineering, the models behind AI, and some of the applications that can be done to demystify it. That's what we do with cybersecurity is we don't introduce the tools so they become hackers. It's to demystify some of the things that they'll experience just as a user on the network. But, it's still hard to get that course through. It's still a work in progress. And I think we're all learning it together. And I think there's some, certainly fears and reservations about just jumping into it without having more answers.
So what are the fears? What? Because it feels to me like there's an eventuality that you'll have a course, next year.
Yes.
Year after probably seems like way too long, right? So is there that recognition that we really do have to introduce students to it because it's coming?
Yeah, I think there's two sides of it. I certainly see. There's no denying students have to learn this. This is just, companies are making decisions. People in life are making decisions all around AI. So to deny them that exposure is really not good in the long run. But there's also fears that the teaching maybe hasn't caught up with the AI, right? And so we may be asking, one of the big fears is like, are we producing or tasks or assignments that are kind of AI durable, right? Like, is a student, could they short circuit the whole process of learning just by using AI? And I think, we haven't maybe looked at all of the ways in which we teach to maybe protect that, at this point. Certainly it hasn't been thought through to that full level yet.
A comment I made earlier in prep with you was there's utility and restraint.
Yes.
Because these are new transformative technologies that need to be taught appropriately. It's not just open the floodgates and have at it. That has a potentially negative effect.
Yes.
But in a constructive way, how does teaching and learning get to integrating AI and other transformative technologies in a curriculum without it being erosive?
Yeah. I could tell you probably the biggest barrier to that now is teacher comfort with AI. I think it's been sold a lot as like to the profession, let's just say at this point, as a productivity tool.
Okay.
And I think there's some truth to that, but I don't think the productivity piece is panned out like it was promised. I think it's a better learning tool, those kinds of things. And we did talk about this a little bit as using it as a kind of a critical friend or personalized learning agent, right? And I think that's something we haven't had a lot of practice at, and I think that there's a skill to that too.
Yeah.
But it's an emerging thing, so I don't know the answers to that.
I do love the term critical friend.
Yeah. It's a sounding board, even. Hey, I've done this. Is this consistent with the assignment?
Right.
Yet that type of thing isn't replacing the exercise.
No.
It's supporting it potentially.
No. it's just hard to monitor sometimes. And, whether
Yeah.
like intent is big, right? Like
Mhm.
it's hard to know the intent of a student who's engaging with AI to complete an assignment. Are they just doing it to get it done?
Sure.
That's a big motivation. Obviously, there's kids are pulled in millions of directions and want to get stuff done.
Yeah, and that's no different today than
Yeah.
100 years ago.
Right.
Right.
Or 10 years ago, when we were talking about plagiarism of Wikipedia or something like that. It's
Right.
just shifted slightly.
Shifted slightly.
Slightly.
right.
Substantially.
Yeah.
It's just so it's easier and quicker.
All the same, it's digital literacy
Yeah.
from 20 years ago, just with different terms.
Yes. Yes.
So then, how can teachers equip students to use these things constructively without it being a problem for the lesson planning?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think to me, like, and this is a trend in education in general anyway, is like more towards sort of this kind of group learning in a way where we kind of learn together. And I think maybe as teachers, maybe model ways in which they use it and do kind of the same thinking and model that thinking for students in an AI context. I think that would be probably the most instructive. But people still have trouble getting away from the model of like the teacher as the person that knows everything, the source of knowledge. And I think like saying AI knows a lot of stuff and I'm going to learn with you can be an uncomfortable place to be as a teacher.
And then I'm sure not all your teachers are as comfortable with AI.
Exactly.
Right.
So
So
interest,
yeah.
comfort.
or no interest. There's
Yeah.
folks I'm sure at the tail end of their career that just sort of feel like I want to wrap up before I have to deal with all of this. I'm sure there's a perspective of that.
100%. There's even teachers who will say, they'll look at the research and say, some of these studies where they've seen how people's writing is affected
Sure.
by using AI, and they take that tool away and their writing sort of decays as like a skill. And so there's a group of people, and I don't disagree with them, that the wrong use of AI is actually, stunting your growth.
Sure.
So I think until we have some of those answers, I think there's always going to be a group that's a little reluctant to do that.
In some ways, though, this is the same sort of lesson that we've tried to teach students or emerging professionals in general. Critical thought, understanding of the problem domain, they are still central to everything.
Yes.
And recognizing reflectively that there isn't that expertise is sometimes the mechanism that allows you to acquire it.
Right.
How, in that kind of light, can you see this being used constructively? For example, with brainstorming.
Yes.
Creative thinking around a project that isn't well defined in a
Mhm.
deliberate way.
Right. Right. Yeah. I think that's a great question. It's hard to, I think it comes down to planning the scope of that task, right? Where is it going to go, and having a sense of like the boundaries of what working with AI would be as opposed to working with like a bunch of sources that you've already curated for a student. Certainly a bit more open. And I think some of these, like Notebook LM, I think is a fascinating tool where it, kind of collects a certain body of knowledge that you're forced to kind of work with. And I think it kind of narrows the universe a little bit of things. I think that's an interesting step I've seen that I see a lot of pedagogical approaches for that. But again, I think it comes down to like a system and a procedure and a set of customs we establish around the use of it. Like what are the best practices? Like how do you use AI to think more critically? How do you use it as a reflection tool? Those questions are much more open. I don't think there's a lot of good answers on that from the average person teaching, right? I don't have those answers, and I deal with it all the time, but it's something I do think about for sure.
Would teaching by counterexample be helpful? Like
Absolutely.
here's a particular task that AI is really inequipped to assist with. Here's how we can steer it toward better outcomes as an individual still who has to resolve that problem.
Absolutely. And I think the challenge will be finding those examples and finding great examples, tools, approaches that sort of think about AI as a way to be the tool you want to use in the future to solve problems that are really big problems. But at the same time, we have such, a tradition in teaching that is revolved not around AI.
Sure.
And so that's like people are very comfortable with that, and Socratic methods, and how do those things adapt to a technological thing like AI is very different to see. So I think teachers need a lot of practice, just like anybody else, with it, and I think we're still at the early stages of it.
So then what's the page turn? Governance is something that's missing in a lot of educational institutions. We work with the colleges that
Yes.
maybe had a head start in 2020, but are now realizing that they're not keeping pace with change.
Yes.
Or they're not comfortable with the tools that they
Yeah.
bring
Right,
out. Right?
absolutely.
Absolutely.
Ethically or
100%. I mean, sometimes there's a licensing barrier or
That's
a
another
cost
one.
barrier that
Yeah.
prevents them from being as useful as
Yes.
advertised.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
What's that look like for you? What are the governance needs at the moment that are absent?
Yeah, that's that's a tough one. I mean, right now the governance is like we don't really use AI.
Yeah, yeah,
And I think part of that is an equity thing too. Not every kid at home has premium,
Very fair.
Yep.
open AI or anything, but I think there's also just I think a little bit of a respect for the fact that if you unleash this to people, like a group of teachers, faculty, administrators who aren't really prepared for the questions that will result from this. I mean, plagiarism is one we've
Of course.
talked
And
about.
that was immediate. Yeah.
And that's been it's sort of more education around plagiarism with this now than punitive. I mean, it was a little bit more cut and dried, and now it's like, hey, you shouldn't use AI to do this. And it's like, well, but I've heard people say you should use it to think about ideas. And it's like, well, you didn't think about ideas. And,
Yeah.
so there's a lot of explaining to do. And I've seen people talk about, keeping drafts of what you do as a way to say, hey, this was my interactions with AI. Could you see that I was actually critically thinking
Right.
with it, or I was
So
reflecting
prove your
with this.
work
Yeah,
in
prove
exactly
your
the same
work.
way that we think of
But
another.
that's a different kind of
Right.
evidence.
It is.
That's not evidence we've asked students to do before. And
But it is aligned with citations and
It
a
is,
traditional
yes. Of course it is.
style.
yes,
It's really directly related to that.
it
And
is.
honestly, even when using it at work, I always try to provide, here are the prompts that I use to get to the end, because it actually helps contextualize how did you get there, what were you thinking, so people don't have to infer. So I think there's value in that. It
Yeah.
oftentimes produces kind of a long and kind of peculiar output. But you do want, like, if
You
you're going to
do.
share something with somebody and say, this is what I generated, having that information around what were the questions, what did you ask it to do, what were your follow-ups, it's really valuable.
I think so. And I think like a student would learn from that. I think in the moment, you're probably like, in the rhythm or vibing with it, you're kind of asking questions, learning things. And then I think if you, as a student or a teacher, reviewed that whole log, you might be discovering things about yourself and your thinking process that you probably didn't really realize.
And you're learning together,
Metacognition.
right?
Yeah,
The
learning
teacher can look
together,
at them
yeah.
and say, actually, I didn't even think about asking those. Because there's no question, I see my kids engage with AI differently than I do.
Yes.
And it makes me step back and realize, my perspective is kind of narrow at times.
Yeah.
Right.
I think there is utility in reflective review of interaction like that.
Yeah.
For example, if there's a rubric for evaluating performance of a student in an assignment, if that is fed in as sort of a basis to
Yeah.
evaluate the interaction or the work,
Yes.
it's what's missing, what's present, where's the strongest, where is it similar?
Exactly.
That's something that might steer next steps as much as anything else.
I think that's true.
But one thing I want to return to is that this is a teaching and learning discussion, but I think from a bias perspective, before we get to student support, there absolutely needs to be educator support. That's what I'm
Yes.
hearing very strongly.
Yes.
And
100%.
I hear that in colleges and universities regularly. This is universal truth.
I hope it is. Yeah.
How can we support educators?
Yeah. I think districts have been very good. I think I'll speak to mine about supplying tools for teachers. Like teachers do have access to AI.
Sure.
As a teaching tool. And we've encouraged through professional development, opportunities to redesign lessons with this in mind, mostly around making sure preserving student thinking, not so much about students using the tools, but like if they do it, could they, if you created an assignment, can we preserve their thinking and their growth as students, but Not so much like, hey, here's how you use it. Here's what you're going to be asked to do with AI. That part is still missing for us, and I think we may be always a little bit behind in the sort of teaching part of this. But I will say that like districts like ours, and I don't think ours is much different in that way, are encouraging teachers to use it. I hope we're still encouraging people to do it in a way that's about, making more interesting tasks and not about shortcuts and productivity things. And that's really a lot of times how it gets sold. And I don't think that's super effective that
I,
way.
I think you bring up the survey course.
Yes.
It would be great for your faculty to take that same course.
Yes.
I mean, that because I think part of this is, I'll use sort of use two words. I think demystify AI a little bit, and teach people that there's more to AI than just an LLM and ChatGPT interface.
Yes.
But unlike you don't necessarily need to have your faculty go through a networking course, because the reality is they're not going to do that. But AI, I've heard it described as like the democratization of IT.
Yes.
And in some way it is that, right? It makes it makes somebody who doesn't have a technical background able to create a small web app or to do some things that might be useful for them day to day. They don't have to go to somebody else to do it, but they don't really know the tools exist. They don't really know how to use them. And I think that would probably aid in increasing the comfort level overall.
Yes. 100%.
I have found it extremely useful to represent it as a translation tool. And before we were talking about
Translation,
multiple flavors in that word being contemplated at the same time. You were referring earlier to it being used for language acquisition.
no, yeah.
But it is a translation tool for people outside of their area of expertise.
Yes.
And you can say, I am a X. I know these things. I don't know these things.
Yep.
Please explain this foreign subject to me in language that helps me get some bridging in between. I think that all by itself, because teachers are translators.
Yes.
Yeah,
They are.
It's intrinsically supporting that, but it's reframing it in that mode so that it doesn't seem disjoint with the activity.
I agree.
I think there's room, though, for adversarial devil's advocate functions against the use of these tools. Meaning, if there are folks who do not feel comfortable, they still have a place. There's value in retaining the human.
Yes.
Describing that as a teaching device to those who are then educating is, I think, useful too.
Yes.
Being able to interrogate systems like this to understand their limits, when they hallucinate, where they fall short,
Right.
is something that most people do not know or understand.
Right.
And because they are not domain experts in the subjects, we have to equip them with some of those skills. I think that's probably the area that I think is best for at least the teaching faculty.
I agree. I
think students need it too.
100%. I mean, I don't think a student can learn it unless we're modeling it first. I mean, that's really the big thing. And as you were talking about that, I was thinking, yeah, we have to do that, right? Like we have to practice doing that. And then I think we'll feel more comfortable doing that with students, because it's going to be kind of in real time a lot of times. And I think a lot of people that gives up a lot of control, So I think that's another piece of this, that you've sort of said, hey, I acknowledge AI as being a knowledge source, right? Not outside myself. And then how do I integrate that as we're all thinking at the same time? That takes quite some orchestration, I think, and some comfort with it.
So then, getting close to the future and charting a path toward whatever that may be, what are the biggest gaps for a student right now in terms of comfort? What are the biggest gaps for faculty? What do they, in a concrete way, if you have those ideas?
Yeah, I mean,
what do they need to do?
I think there's a few things. I've thought a little bit about this, and we've talked about a few of these. But I think, getting this to be part of an educator's practice all the time, I think as a tool that we use just like any other, is probably the first step. I think there's a surprising amount of student reluctance around AI too, that we're still working on. Certainly kids who were in high school as OpenAI dropped and made their, chat available. I think there was a real concern by some students about the perception of plagiarism.
Sure.
and being scared to use it because they would, get themselves into trouble or get themselves into uncharted territory. But then there's the other side of that. There's reckless abandon.
Yeah, and that's a mature perspective
Yes.
if they're coming to that.
Yeah. So I think some of these things that, getting back to what you're saying about what we need to do is just, I think there's got to be a commitment to say, this isn't going anywhere. How do we systematically redesign how we think about teaching and learning so that, again, I think it's a more collaborative thing with students and teachers, collaborative among teachers now. I mean, I think, our district is having a tech expo this month, of which they're bringing some students in to talk about some of their experiences using AI. And so hopefully some of those conversations reveal some of their fears and some of their, like real excitement around using it. So really the gamut of like their motivations around it. I think understanding what they're thinking too. All of us are kind of thinking everyone else knows what's going on with AI. I mean, in my school, they're like, oh, I don't know it. They must know way more than I do. But the truth is we all have little pockets of things we use it for. But I think, practicing using it as like a real, kind of like like I said before, a critical friend or somebody who's a thinker with you is like kind of where we need to go at this point.
I find myself thinking about I like the critical friend.
Yeah.
The term.
You can steal that.
Well, so I use a variety of tools, but OpenAI has its sort of persistent memory.
Yes.
And so it's really valuable because it has context around, what I do for work, what I do for fun, questions I've asked.
Yes.
So it can integrate that, right?
Yes.
So but I also find myself thinking like I want to kind of move away from OpenAI into something else. But I basically have to reintroduce. I have to make a new friend, and right, which I hadn't really thought about it that way.
It's true.
But there's value in it knowing me through its memory, and the idea of moving is a little more complicated because of that. Because I essentially it has to relearn me.
Yes.
And I don't know that I'm ready to make a new friend.
I've thought the same thing.
And I hadn't thought about it quite in that concrete term. And I was trying to figure out why I was resistant to leaving. And it's because of that.
Yeah.
And you can't transition that memory.
Right. There's inertia there. I was thinking about a similar subject recently in terms of companies building software through AI augmented workflows.
Mm-hmm.
If they have a really disruptive event and need to rebuild something they've lost, well, what's that mean?
Right.
That's
true.
6 weeks of compute on thousands of GPUs in aggregate. That's terrifying.
Yeah, that is kind of terrifying.
You're married to what led you to that point. Whether you're an individual or an organization. There are risks here.
And reproducibility is really difficult, I find.
It is.
You can ask the same question to the same engine 2 different days and get very different outcomes.
Absolutely.
Even that is desirable.
Chat.
Yeah, right.
Right. Yeah. You can turn. Yeah. And also too, it's I find it's oftentimes like very enthusiastic about whatever idea I've had to.
Yeah.
So,
It's very supportive.
But this is kind of, and I'm like 5 minutes later, I'm like, this is a terrible idea.
Yeah.
But there's my critical friend, you don't want to ask him to tear it apart, he's not that critical and really likes me.
I really like
As a critical friend isn't so sycophantic.
Right. And they are kind of sycophantic.
Yes,
for sure. So eventually it'll back off of that. But it is interesting. I do love that term because I think you find yourself asking it, please, and you're having you are oftentimes engaging in a very human way.
Mm-hmm.
And I find myself thinking, like, why?
Right.
But then I don't want to be rude. Right? It's a crazy feeling.
It is a crazy feeling. Feeling.
Here we are.
And here we are, right?
So we'll chat. I mean, I think we said we want to do this more regularly. It's been a while.
Absolutely.
Definitely before the start of next year.
Yes.
I want to
get
back on. Yeah, I knew we could talk a little bit more about this. I feel we do a lot of AI discussions, but I think there's just so much, honestly, this uncertainty, this confusion. You're right in you're in the thick of it.
But I think you're right. I mean, it's everywhere, but at the same time, it's sometimes quite fragmented.
Sure.
And I think something like this brings a lot of those pieces together what things are the same that people are going through.
Yeah,
and what
absolutely.
what can you add to the discussion that maybe other fields aren't thinking about too? So
In our work, we try to bring the structure, the data safeguards, the governance
Yes.
attached to it.
Yeah, protect the data.
But that can't exist in isolation without a funnel toward the actual use from the users. So it's intrinsically necessary to have this other side of the conversation.
it's good.
Well, as always, we're happy to chat about any of these topics. And I don't know, like this wasn't quite as meandering as I was thinking we might. This is reasonably focused,
Actually,
but it's a complicated topic.
It is.
And if you're an educator and you want to weigh in on your opinions on how to do this, we're all ears. Probably help John as you go through it.
Absolutely.
If you think some of the stuff we said is ridiculous, let us know that too. That's quite possible. But as always, thanks for listening, and of course, we hope you got value out of this. Thanks. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Sure.
We'd love to hear your feedback. Feel free to get in touch at Vancord on LinkedIn. And remember, stay vigilant, stay resilient. This has been CyberSound.